All right, guys. Well, this is kind of a different video that we have on the channel now. We're going to do kind of an interview style with Matt. So, other half of the channel, we'll get a little bit of his background. I've talked about my background before, but this is going to be a series of videos, and you guys are welcome to ask questions as well. In fact, some of the questions that we gathered for this video came from our Discord group. So, if you want to ask questions in future videos or question and answer, make sure to join our Discord group or leave a comment below in this section. But regardless, what we wanted to do for this video is talk about Matt's experience at Capital One as a machine learning engineer. So out of college, you joined Capital One, spent a few years at Capital One, and I believe you started with AI towards the end of your stay at Capital One, and then you've been focusing on that over the last few years. And it's amazing to see where that's scaled to. But before we jump into with AI side of the story, we got to talk about the Capital One and how you got into machine learning, because not a lot of people go straight from college into machine learning. It does take a few years. So I guess this comes from our Discord on the first question over here. What skills did you have to pick up before landing your first machine learning role?
Good question. I will note, just so that the viewers know, the goal of this video, and if we do some future ones, interview style, I don't know the questions ahead of time, just like a real sort of interviewer would have. I don't know what questions Ryan's about to ask me. So, just wanted to state that these answers are straight off, sort of my knowledge of it, things like that. So what skills did I have for the interview process? Most interviews for entry level-ish software and machine learning roles are honestly going to be pretty much the same. I don't know if there was any machine learning interview questions in my interview. It was mostly like LeetCode. It was some in when you work in like banking, you'll do like case study questions, which are like a business use case style thing. You'll do like an in-person talk about your experience and stuff, but it really wasn't that much different than like a traditional software role or something like that. Some jobs, some of the ones that are more like very heavy on machine learning focus, like as a company as a whole, you will get more like usually like data related questions more than machine learning ones. But mine, I think they asked me about my experience and I told them about it, but none of the questions I solved in person were machine learning focused. They were mostly, LeetCode, problem solving, trying to see how you think about think about problems, think about issues. And then in most banking related companies, you're going to have some sort of like business use case or like business case study question that you have to tackle on the spot. You don't know what those are ahead of time.
Now, I did look at your LinkedIn. It said you started there as a software engineer. Did you transition to machine learning, or did you join as a software engineer that focused on machine learning?
Yeah, so I joined as a software engineer, but my team that I was assigned to because of my experience was a machine learning team. So my title was, associate software engineer or whatever, but my team, everyone on the team was a machine learning engineer. I just because of my background and my experience and things like that. So it was all, sort of machine learning focused.
On the LeetCode side of things, some people love it, some people hate it. What type of difficulty did you have on those questions? Personally, I don't see a lot of application on LeetCode style questions, at least for data science. I know machine learning is a little bit more software intensive, but what level would you say? Easy, medium?
I would say they were probably medium, maybe more on the hard side, but somewhere there in the middle. I was really ready for them going in. I had put in hundreds of hours at that point into it. So to me, they felt like a piece of cake. The other thing is, so this was back when people did in-person interviews. My interview was in person. And you actually, for my LeetCode questions, they actually weren't real coding language. They were pseudocode. So you did them on a whiteboard in front of, you had like a hiring manager, you had like a software engineer in there. So mine were all pseudocode. Now I knew how to do them in code. I just didn't want to get my syntax wrong or something like that. But they were medium, maybe a little bit on the harder side, but I was really ready for them. I had done hundreds and hundreds of hours of them. I almost like when they would say which one it was, I knew how to solve it before they finished the sentence. I knew which one it was. I remembered the exact LeetCode question. I'm not a fan of LeetCode. I don't really like it. I think it's
more memorization than anything else. I'd rather just give.
Yeah,
I know this is also kind of controversial, but like to test someone out, I'd rather just give them like a 3 to 5 hour project and say, see what you could do on that side of things. Some people take it overboard, and I see what people post, like companies ask for a 20-hour project for interview. That's crazy. But I think like, you could give someone something that's 3 hours to 5 hours. You could have a decent understanding of like how in depth they are. And some people criticize like, well, they can GPT anything. Well, guess what? On the job, you could GPT anything as well. And I mean, and what the results from that, you have to do more than just plugging something in a GPT and, oh, here's my project. So that's my personal take. But
yeah, projects are the LeetCode and companies like that. They more want to see your thought process. You can get LeetCode questions wrong in an interview and still get the job if they like the way you talk about the problems. If they like the way that you sort of explain what you're trying to do. That's really more their focus on than anything else. I prefer projects as well, but for a company that size, they just don't do. There was
there's so many interviews,
hundreds of applicants. I think when I went in, just for that day alone, I think there was 50 or 60 people on site, and that was for one Capital One office, and that was one day. They do like months and months of it, so there's a lot of people. It's way easier for them to just 3.5 hours. I think it took me about 3.5 hours to do everything. Just get people through and then go from there.
Was that your first company that you tried to work with out of college, or were there other, banking institutions or other companies that you applied to and tried going through?
So I actually worked for 9 months for a company before that, a government subcontractor, as an AI engineer as well. So I that was the first one I worked for, only for it was like 7 or 9 months, something like that. That was a project-based interview. So I had a take-home project. This was pre-GPT. This was
before, way different time.
And that was that thing probably took me about 15 hours to do. It was really hard. And it was Java. So this wasn't Python. It's the government. Everything they used to do back then was Java. And I only ever applied to there and I got the job, and I applied to Capital One and I got the job. But I had
way different market today too.
Different market. And I also, I got a referral for the Capital One job. So I went straight to a hiring manager. I didn't have to sift through the junk. But those were the only two I think I ever applied for. Yeah, I think that was it.
And speaking of projects, this is another question that came from our Discord. I don't know how much you could talk about it, but what was either like your most challenging or your favorite project at Capital One?
That's kind of an interesting question. Oh, the most challenging, easily the most challenging. I won this. This was easy because I won a performance award for this. So I'm not under NDA. I can say whatever I want. So all of the customer record stuff is done. They use pandas as just like we do. They used to use only pandas. But a lot of this stuff is massive, right? A lot of their data, a lot of their ETL is massive. Pandas, especially back then, not super optimized for data at that scale, right? It's nice when we're doing it, but for data pipeline, stuff that needs to move like this, it's slow. I converted the entire finance ETL pipeline to Dask. Dask is a parallelized version of pandas, which was really new at the time. It was a very new software tool. I converted everything to Dask. I wrote all the parallelization functions. I wrote, all the CUDA optimization. I wrote libraries in CUDA for GPU processing. That was by far the most challenging. It wasn't enjoyable. It was okay. Probably the most enjoyable. So I worked for part of my time on anomaly detection in banking records, which was really fun because at the time this is pre-GPT. We didn't even have Capital One at the time, didn't even have BERT approved. You couldn't even use BERT in production. So building anomaly detection models, like isolation forest, LOF, things like that was really enjoyable at that scale. Considering the type of data you're using, the volume of data you have to test, that was probably the one I enjoyed the most, I would say.
And what features did you find out, like as you were building your models, that kind of surprised you, that flagged it?
Well, what's nice is there aren't a lot of anomalies in these data sets. Like I will say, like it's not one of the more challenging use cases because there just aren't a lot. But there is, because of the size of the data, there is a lot of different ways for anomalies to exist. It can be fully transaction size based. It can be, transaction string based, whatever the record code was. So although there weren't a lot, like 99.99% weren't anomalies, the ones that were always very unique, which makes it a little bit more challenging because it's a little bit harder to build stuff to find. But it was mostly, transaction ID related, volume or price related, kind of the standard stuff that you think of when you think of like banking record anomalies. But it was interesting because they were so unique every time. You didn't see a lot of the same stuff just due to the size, 40 million, 50 million a day coming through.
No, that makes sense. And I want to continue on this project trend because another question that was asked is, as a beginner, right, what type of projects would you prioritize in a machine learning portfolio?
So I think nowadays you should want to focus on, like, I would really pick like some specific domain and really just hone in on that. I wouldn't go, general, lot of different stuff. Like I would really pick like one specific thing. Maybe it's the domain you want to work in. Maybe it's the industry you want to work in, whatever. I would like really hone in and have the best stuff just for that. Instead of going wide and having like fine stuff for everything, I would show that you are really, really good at like some specific thing. And whether that's, fine tuning some NLP models, whether that's building a chatbot, whether it's, optimizing it, embedding architecture, or maybe you're into the image stuff, doing, image to text. I would like really refine and like really focus on specific stuff. It's going to be very hard for any of your stuff to stand out if it's not like really, really good. And I would just hone in. It's different when I did it way back where you could just pick anything. And like, as long as you had it in your resume, like it looked really good, it looked really cool. I would like really focus on, like maybe you really want to work in chatbots in finance, like build a bunch of those, like show that more than just how to use a Kaggle data set to do it. Show how to optimize it. Show how to fine tune it. Show like a higher level compared to what other people are going to put, which is maybe something more generic. So I talked about that in the resume video as well. Like I would just really focus on, just a refined skill set that shows that you understand some specific thing better than everyone else does.
And definitely also practice presenting it to a few people, especially when you get into interviews, because if you only talk about it for 2 or 3 minutes, you could have the best project out there, but then the interviewer might be like, that's it, that's your project. So really focus on storytelling, which I do think a lot of people have issues with learning how to properly tell a story. So really, really focus on that skill set. Because as an interviewer, you would be like, that's kind of interesting story. Like go along the way, talk about your failures, how you overcome those failures. There's a lot of case studies out there on how you could present a story specifically. Maybe we can dive into it in another video in the future, but selling stories alone can really, really help your projects in the interview phase.
Yeah, you're gonna want to be able to talk about whatever your success criteria is really well. You can't just say, I built a chatbot for, I don't know, merger and acquisition documents. Like that's just gonna be too generic of like an end result. It should be like, hey, I built a chatbot for, merger and acquisition documents. and it outperforms blah blah blah, or it's at the same level as this. Like you want to have like something that helps it stand out as much as possible, to be able to do that. You know, it wasn't nearly as competitive when I did it, but my stuff still stood out because I understood sort of like how to talk about it in a way that like made it as presentable as possible.
Now, in college, you studied, I believe, computer science. What classes did you take, either as electives or main courses, had the most impact on your machine learning career that you've had so far?
Can I say none, really? A little bit of like my timeline. So I graduated in 2019. Fall of 2018 is when the BERT research paper, BERT and Elmo, were released. And they were really, really interesting. That was a very new level of NLP and NLP ability. And I got really interested in like how those systems worked. I had kind of been interested in it before, like neural networks, but like I didn't have classes in it. My school didn't have classes for it. But those papers released and I got really into it. And at the same time, that was my final year of my undergrad. And so I had a capstone class, right? And so I picked machine learning for my capstone. I was like, this is actually probably a really good way to learn this. It's something I can put on my resume. Like, it's going to kind of force me to put in the time to learn BERT and some of the other things I did for that capstone. But, you know, be able to get something out of it and like, you know, have something I could show on my resume. So that was really it. Other than I found it really interesting. Like I found, you know, at the time, like we're talking about like TensorFlow neural networks, like really interesting. The pay was attractive in terms of like comparing, you know, normal software jobs to that. The other thing that I kind of liked was I was trying to figure out how to differentiate myself from everyone else that I was doing computer science with. How can I look different? How can my stuff look different? And at the time, that was machine learning, because most of these goofballs were taking, you know, Android development and they wanted to become Android developers or like something like that. They wanted to go work for NASA and write Java code all day. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. And there's this nice little niche that really nobody's focused on and it pays more. I was like, this is like a win-win. Like, what are these people doing? And so I not only did my sort of interest in like BERT and Elmo, because they were just revolutionary they were wild at the time. But that was able to go with my capstone and just kind of, it just kind of like nicely worked there my senior year.
Yeah, now I believe a lot of universities have fully dedicated classes to that.
Oh yeah.
Which I wish I knew about all this stuff back when I was in college. I took one data analytics class, which I didn't even know data analytics was a full path until I took it, which was based off of ticket sales for sports teams. And you guys knew that, you know, me and Matt love sports cards. So that's how we actually met before this channel started. So it's a good hobby of mine. And, you know, taking a whole class talking about ticket sales introduced us to Tableau, a little bit of like how people use SQL. I was like, oh, this is really cool. Of course, I'm getting an electrical engineering degree at the time. So completely opposite perspective. Although we have a few coding classes, we focus more on electronics. But after a while, I decided. Go ahead.
We did actually have one. Now that I think about it, we did have one AI class, but it was classical AI. They didn't even do neural networks. It was everything pre-neural networks. It was classical AI, which is actually good to learn. But I just, it was an elective. I was kind of like, whatever. I really only cared about like the new stuff. I didn't want to go back and learn that stuff. Eventually I did go back and learn that stuff, but I just didn't, it wasn't that enticing.
Yeah. So anyways, what I was going to say is, so after that class, I had to go either decide to phone electrical engineering or data analytics, and decided to go data analytics route. I'm kind of glad I did. I don't think I would have enjoyed electrical engineering. I chose that degree because out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I looked for degrees that were hard in math and paid well and that were engineering. Electrical engineering was towards the top of the list. I said, perfect. Yeah. And then I went through there. Literally, that's about it. So,
well, and I mean, you would have found out quickly. One of my good buddies graduated with electrical engineering, got a job in it. after a year and a half, he went back to school and took Python stuff and became a data analyst. It literally was it was the same route.
So it worked out. And actually, going into the company I am now, the person that was doing data analytics before me was an electrical engineer as well. So it's a small world. I feel like a lot of electrical engineers move out of it. It's not really enjoyable. You think it's cool, like, oh, all these circuits, and then you find out.
It's cool in like a class. I took electrical engineering classes. It's cool in like a class, but it's not enjoyable. Like, I don't think it's like, hey, I want to wake up every day and do it. It was like
versus data, it's fun. Like every day I'm like, this is interesting when I run
software is more enjoyable than hardware, and it pays better than hardware.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of last two questions. I'm gonna lump them together. So what does the autonomy look like at your job when you work at a huge company like Capital One? And how often do you have to work with other departments? I come from two smaller companies, 300-400 employees in general. So I typically work with multiple departments at any given time. Obviously, Capital One is such a large company. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, this is one of the sort of shocks to yourself when you go from school where your projects are either just you, or maybe like, maybe you do some with like a couple teammates or something, and like you really have full control over the workflow, the life cycle of writing code, testing it, pushing, maintaining. Like you have full and they're smaller, right? They're just a little bit smaller. When you go to something like a Capital One, when you go to some of these larger ones, you figure out really quickly that like you are just like, you have a very specific part of this thing that you're doing. You aren't in charge of as much, mostly because the code bases are Goliaths. Like, you might go in there thinking like, I can manage all the stuff like I just did with my projects in undergrad. I know where everything is in the code base. I can do all the testing. I can do all the stuff. It's not the same. There's stakeholders that use your projects now. There's downstream teams that use your stuff that rely on your testing. It is an incredibly different scenario. It'll be very overwhelming at first because these code bases are absolutely enormous and literally nothing about them. Absolutely nothing when you go into it. The data, right? When you go in and let's say you're getting in there to fine tune models, in the undergrad class, they probably give you a CSV. Like in this one, you're not getting CSVs. You got to go to Snowflake. You got to figure out how to pull data out of there. You got to go through hundreds of warehouses to find the stuff you need. Now you do have support. Like, people on your team are going to understand that like this takes a long time to get to the point of being able to do the stuff on your own when coming into it. But your role is going to be very hyper focused on whatever you're doing for that specific project. And that is because there is so much out there, so much to do, that it doesn't make sense to have you doing much more than that. It really is going to feel like a very different way of coding compared to the undergrad or a Kaggle project where nobody's relying on your work. Nobody downstream cares about it. The data is small. It's localized. Like these systems are massive. There's going to be thousands of contributors on that repository over years and years and years. There's going to be, every time you push, you're going to have PRs, you're going to have code reviews, you're going to have pushing out some sort of testing bed like Jenkins and something and watching it run through. And then you're going to do all that in dev, and then you have to move to prod and do the same thing. It is going to be a different style of coding, all those reasons I mentioned, but also some of the stuff that you are expected to just be able to do on the problem solving side should already be covered. When you're doing those projects in school, you're trying to learn the problem solving part of it. That's expected of you when you get into these. Now you're doing all this other stuff to try to fit into this massive ecosystem of what's going on there.
And how does the documentation work? Like, is there a lot of documentation, or is it a lot of, oh, I think it's in this table, I need to talk to a colleague to see if they have a little bit more context, and they refer you to someone else and it becomes telephone?
There is generally a ton of documentation compared to what you're used to. But you will find like a lot of what some of these systems are, they are so incredibly complex that you would have to go through hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation to figure out what you're supposed to do with some of this stuff. It could take you there. You could be hopping into a file to do something and you realize like, hey, I need to use this class. It could take you an hour to find the class, just to find the class in the code base. There are going to be people there that will help you find the things that you do because either they've just been there long enough or they wrote it. So like that sort of relying on other people, you know, in when you're in school, like you just do less of that with these projects, but you really do want to do that, especially early on, because it's going to be way too much. You're going to be sitting there spinning your wheels. You're going to have no idea what to do. And people kind of understand that. They know that like this is pretty unique when you get into this situation, especially if you're working in something that is just, you know, very large.
Yeah, and I think the last thing, and I had mentioned this should have been the last question, but kind of your biggest takeaway from working at Capital One, you know, your biggest lessons that you've been able to apply to your agency now.
It's a different job flow than smaller companies or things like that. It is a, you know, like I said, I worked for a little bit before that at a small subcontractor where everyone at the whole company was on one floor of the office and we all kind of worked on the same stuff. It's a very different, you know, workflow and you don't, you know, you work on the stuff that you're kind of asked to do, you know, you move through it. It's generally not very innovative. I would say like I spent most of my time complaining about wanting to do stuff that I knew was better. And I know I was right because now they use all of those tools. But it's a very sort of programmatic, do what you're sort of assigned to do on this bigger team approach, which some people really like. Because it does, you know, you do get to work on stuff that's pretty in the weeds because these projects are so large. But it is much more of that. There's more, I would say, project management. You're going to have a project manager who has another manager there. You're going to have a technical lead. You know, there's going to be more of that than say it like a smaller company, or definitely like with us. Like we don't, you know, we have project management, but like we don't do half that stuff. So it's just going to be a much more like intertwined experience. It's very hard to be able to, while you're there, do stuff on your own, you know, because you're working in something that relies on so many other people and people are waiting for stuff from you. It's just a very, you know, like interlocked system. The other thing is because it's in banking, because it's in finance, there's a lot more security around your work. There's a lot more data governance around your work. There's a lot more support around your work than if you are working in a smaller company like a startup, or you're working in like a, you know, like government subcontractor. There's none of that. It's a little bit different from that front as well.
And I can agree with that. Work in the fintech space, there's a lot of data governance. Like I'm on weekly calls based around that now, which my first job, I didn't even know what data governance was. And then I got exposed to it at this job. So,
and there's a lot of, we do this because that's what we do. There's a lot of that. We use this model because that's what we use.
Yeah.
Really the part that I would say the only part that I really didn't enjoy is I'm someone like, as you know, like I am very honest about how I feel about something. If I think it's stupid, like I'm going to tell you I think it's stupid. It doesn't mean, you know, I think you're stupid. It means like I just want to find the correct approach. That's not something that is generally enjoyed in a setting like that. And you know, I just have opinions on things, and you know, I can be wrong on it, but I want everyone to feel like they can express what should be right. And And there's a lot of just, this is what we do, and that's what works, and things like that, which, you know, is perfectly fine.
Absolutely. So this is going to be the end of the first episode of this. Next week or the week after, we're going to be covering with AI and how you've been able to scale that. Because it's incredible, man. You're at what, 20 employees there?
No, we have a little bit less than that, but for
You're getting
engineers,
close there.
yeah, we have a little bit less than that.
Either way, it's awesome to see you build that from scratch. And
Yeah,
I'm sure you have tons and tons of lessons. And for everyone watching right now, a few things. Number one, if you want to join our Discord group, we're pretty active in that. Link is going to be down below in the description. We're also relaunching our website. So we have mentorships available, as well as we're in the progress right now, moving all of our YouTube videos into articles. Give us probably 6 to 12 months because we have 200 plus videos.
yeah.
Plus we're putting out new videos every week. So people have complained in the past, no code in the videos. Well, it's being solved right now. So we're working on it. And all that's going to be available over there, as well as other resources. So hope you guys do like these videos. Let us know anything we want to see in the future. Any questions for Matt in the next video. And yeah, I can't wait to continue on with this.
Yeah, looking forward to it.